Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Teacher Mildred.
Good morning, Teacher Noah.
Yep.
You're most welcome to today's economics seminar.
Thank you.
May we start with our word of prayer? You can raise your hand if you'd like to take us through the word of prayer.
Teacher Mildred, I can lead.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, God, our loving Father, we want to thank you for the gift of life. We want to thank you for enabling us to be here. We want to thank you for everything you have been able to do for us. We ask for your wisdom. We ask for a good connection as we start this seminar. Help us to understand everything that the teachers are going to be sharing with us during this session. Help us to be very attentive. Help us to be able to ask where we do not understand, and help us to pick a lot from this seminar such that we can be able to prepare ourselves very well for our incoming exams. We make this through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Thank you very much, Mr. Kazima, for the prayer. Then we shall have Teacher Noah to lead us through the economics seminar.
Thank you, Teacher Mildred. Good
Welcome.
morning, everyone. I hope I am being heard very well. And I hope almost everyone is on board. I also take the opportunity to welcome you to the seminar and thank you for accepting to take your precious time. I know it has not been a good day. Saturday is always something that we use for resting, but I applaud all the candidates for accepting to, give up leisure and then do the noble duty. Dear candidates, we are approaching November, and I'm pretty sure by now everyone has been exposed to the timetable. And unlike those days, our subject is coming after a day. It should give us the guts to prepare very well and improve. Today, we shall largely focus on the how part because the teachers have done their work, but I'm very sure in your different schools, you're finding it a challenge to see at least a 70, an 80, and 90 somewhere. And most especially in the subject where people label it as something hard. But like we did some time back, we want to also try our best to do you a good service of laboring to go into the details of how marks are scored and how best should we write our answers. So today, unlike other sessions, shall dwell much on the how part, which is the explanation, alongside the proper question interpretation. When I was selected to facilitate, I just selected a few areas they may not exhaustively handle all, but at least we, in a space of 2 hours that we are going to spend here, I'm pretty sure we shall pick something. And in our facilitation, I wanted people to give attention to even section A, because when we are handling candidates, you'll discover that some of you have already given up on areas like section A. And sometimes people say, it's 20 marks. Why do I suffer? But it is a basis of you scoring better. And like we said, in our subject, you may not tell exactly which part they will bring in section A, but at least for the many times we have seen the papers, we must have seen that it is hard for you to skip something of senior 5 as part A in section A. And in most cases, we tease people and say, how do you fail a senior 5 area which you studied with some year ago? So I encourage you to give attention to this section as well. That's why I made 2 segments, which later I'm going to ask Teacher Stephen to share as we start. So I have handled the 2 areas of section A, and where possible, you'll have to rectify with your figures, because I want us to follow very well. It is involving both paper 1 and paper 2. So Teacher Stephen, can you kindly share the first part of section A?
Okay. Teacher Mildred, are we set?
I'm working on it in a few minutes.
Okay, let me be sharing. When you get finished, you let me know.
Okay, sir.
Otherwise, candidates, as Teacher Stephen is sharing, we are deliberating on an economic discussion that is going to involve questions, particularly. And we are treating ourselves to such a presentation just to show you that November time may not change so much. For example, when you look at the first shared question, it talks about you distinguishing between cross elasticity of demand and price elasticity of demand. On several occasions, we always say that when they bring such work, please emphasize the use of the separating words, which we said, and the people encouraging you, you either use while or you say whereas. But I told you last time, the challenge of people using whereas, they end up using W-E-L-L. So for me, I insist on the while, so that you don't miss out on a mark. Then don't change the order. We always emphasize and say, if you don't know something, you rather write something wrongly in the concept, but don't change the order of the examiner. Let it be. So with cross elasticity of demand, like we have said, we are looking at the measure of degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to changes in price of other related commodities. Because when we are talking about cross elasticity, we are talking of other commodities which can be substitutes or complements, and that is why we specify and talk of other commodities. But we also go on to look at the price elasticity of demand, measure of degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to changes in its own price. Now, a key word here, we shall look at the degree of responsiveness, and we are looking at the response, how the response comes because of either the price, if you are talking of price elasticity of demand, and how it comes because of the changes in price of other related commodities, if you are talking about cross elasticity. So in most cases, you should not miss out on a keyword, because keywords will be emphasized for you to earn a mark. Then Teacher Stephen, Roman 2 was asking us to have a calculation of gross elasticity of demand. If they said given an increase in price of commodity A from 25,000 to 40,000, which resulted into change in quantity demanded of commodity B from 750 to 800 units. Now, what matters is to emphasize the formula. And here the examiners are looking out for the correct formula, where if you look at our presentation, we are looked at the change in quantity, and that quantity is of course the demand of a commodity they are talking about in the question. It is B, which is commodity B. So I expect the candidate to put B there, divided by the changes in price of commodity A, then multiplied by the original price of commodity A divided by the original quantity of commodity B. If you look at my left side, it is handling changes. And with changes, we want to know how you're going to get the changes. You usually encourage candidates to look out for the new item. In this case, if you are following the formula quantity, we shall look at the first quantity they are telling us was 750 to 800. That's why you are seeing me saying the new quantity becomes 800 minus the old quantity becomes 750. Then below, we have the price. The first price was 25,000, and then it rose to 40,000. That means 40,000 becomes the new price minus the old one, which is 25,000. Then the other side, which is the right-hand side, will accommodate the original of either quantities, that is price and the quantity. So that's why you're seeing me putting 25,000 because it is the one we started with, and then divided by the first unit. Now, in most cases, they will give a mark for the formula, a mark for substitution, and usually when you reach that stage, the last mark will always be the answer. So if you take time, you'll discover that that will be the answer for it. And we say the elasticity does not have any units. You stop there and you get the 3 marks. So in most cases, because this one was a distinction between the two, you'll discover that there will be half a mark for the formula, another half for the substitution, and then another 1 mark. But for you, don't skip all the steps, put them there and take your time. Many candidates fail some of these small things, and yet it is a mere subtraction and multiplication. Then for part B, Teacher Stephen, we are told to differentiate between the marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save, which in our classes we usually see teachers abbreviating as MPC and its sister concept MPS. So when you are defining again, separate using a separating word, which we said while, and put it in the middle, just like you are seeing. So it's a marginal propensity to consume refers to the proportion of additional income that is consumed, while marginal propensity to save refers to the proportion of additional income that is saved. In other words, as we are earning our incomes, there is that proportion or fraction we get and we use it to consume. As you all know, when you're handling income, we expect that when you get income from whichever sources, whether personal or otherwise, you either save it and the other part becomes consuming or using it. So because it is a mixture of the two, we look at the proportions in a fraction in nature, and that is what brings out the definition. Then for part 2,
Teacher Noah, I'm seeing a
yes,
hand. Maybe we can first attempt to that hand.
it's okay.
Teacher Mildred, you can go on. Felix, unmute. There was a hand up, but she's not unmuting. Shamidred, go on and share. Felix.
Yes,
May I
please.
please get the right for sharing?
Yes, you have.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like you to first take us back on the cross elasticity and maybe elaborate well. That cross elasticity is always vis-a-vis between two quantities, one vis-a-vis another. So I would like you to explain to us well to the students on board when it is a negative, when it is a positive, such kind of elasticity, because sometimes they always say comment on the result. So I would like you go back slowly, explain to that so that the audience can capture it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix, and a good observation, very key to the learners. Indeed, I didn't give it attention, but I think it is imperative just because we are in a seminar. Now, in most cases, when they are doing computations, they bring interpretations on cross elasticity of demand, and then income elasticity of demand, and of recent, if you saw last year's paper, we also had the interpretation for cross elasticity of supply. So to clear the air, there will always be three interpretations for cross elasticity of demand, because at one moment you will get an answer which is negative, and at a certain time you are going to get an answer which is positive, and at a certain time you can even get zero. But when the commodities are, when the answer is positive, for such goods, shall call them substitutes, and then for the negative answer under cross elasticity, shall call them complements. But when you are writing complements, members, dear students, you must either write correctly. If you have written complements, it should be C-O-M-P-L-E. Don't write L-I. When you write L-I, that is something else. But if you have written complementary goods, then I comes in place. Instead, you don't use E. Then under a cross elasticity, if the goods are zero, it means they are not related. What are those goods that are not related? Just in front of you, if there is a book and you have a phone, the two are not related, but they are all commodities. But for income elasticity, we shall sometimes get a positive answer, negative answer, and then zero. For income elasticity, when the answer is positive, those goods are normal goods. And then when the answer is negative, they are inferior. And when the answer is zero, they are actually necessities. So thank you very much, Felix. And Teacher Mildred, we can now go on. We had reached actually marginal propensity to consume. Teacher Mildred, kindly share that screen, because we are done with this one. Here, Stephen?
Sorry, the laptop has got a little freeze. To be back shortly.
Oh, okay. Yes. So they asked you to mention 2 reasons for saving in Uganda. Now, reasons 4, dear candidates, we are supposed to write answers relating them with the qualifying word, which is a reason, a rationale. But I always encourage students to introduce what you are saying. Many people say it's time wasting. It is very good actually when you train yourself like that. Majority candidates just come and give answers. Train yourself when you can really try and say, like you said, the 2 reasons for saving in Uganda, then you start. Now here I gave very few because I wanted an input also from you, and it will be sweet if we grow that list together. Teacher Mildred, you will help me, and later on people add on. Why do we save? One of the things we save is to promote investment levels in Uganda. And it is just like Keynes said, if you're going to save, you're going to eventually grow the saving into a bit of investment. So that is one reason why we save. The other one was to cater for unforeseen circumstances. And unforeseen circumstances, we discover that when you are saving, we shall face challenges along the way, and it will be hard for you to disturb people, and certain circumstances come in both just at a personal level. You sometimes look at sickness, for instance, and then you need to survive, go through that. Then sometimes is to finance domestic spending plus other reasons, which I would be happy later on if people add on. But the key word is we are looking at reasons for. We are not going to put answers in a tense that is not required. You are supposed to do this or for this particular reason. Teacher Mildred, let's go on. Is your laptop okay now? Thank you. Yes. Then we have to differentiate between appropriate technology and intermediate technology. A minute, members. We come. So I'm back. Sorry for that delay. Here we are looking at the appropriate technology and intermediate technology. And we have defined it as appropriate technology method of production, which is socially and economically suitable for a given society or economy. Meaning such a technology suits a given society that is going to use it, first of all, in terms of managing it with finances. That is why we are emphasizing economic bit of it. And then the social aspect that people can easily welcome it. While intermediate technology refers to the method of production, which we said is neither so advanced nor so primitive. So that is the difference between the two. Teacher Mildred, let's go on. Then give any two arguments for adopting intermediate technology in Uganda. Like I said, you introduce and then go on to say the two arguments for intermediate technology in Uganda are. Now, when we are arguing for something, we are giving, it would be a reason, yes, but it would be in this case an advantage we advocate for. And in most cases, when students see what are the arguments for this, they are going to think, they are going to say to do this, but when we are looking at arguments for something, then we are generating our ideas as to why it should happen. Basically, there will be the advantages of when we choose that intermediate technology. So we have talked of improves the labor productivity, and then the reason being that it enhances the skill, then promotes acquisition of skill generally after using it, and then leads to better resource utilization. And we are talking of leads to creation of employment opportunities, and then helps to save the foreign exchange. You write it in full. Don't write forex, but it's foreign exchange, and largely because it uses local raw materials. Now, I always advise and say when they ask to, please slightly give an excess. And why we said in most cases the answer 1, 2 may not be correct, but as you give at least more than the required answers, it is good that you can always score better. So you don't lose anything. Like I said in the beginning, when people say you're wasting time to give many, just give your ability. One time I told you, you don't need to give 10 because you're wasting time, but at least an excess. They have asked for 2, give 4, so that you are on the safer side, at least. Teacher Mildred, let's go on. Then D was to state the law of comparative cost advantage. And when we are stating this, we don't want you to say, this states, no, please go on to emphasize and say the law of comparative advantage, then you go on. So you begin with a concept that is being asked, and then you continue. When you are advocating for this comparative cost advantage theory, we usually assume, we start with what it assumes. So when you are stating, you will say, the law of comparative advantage states that, then you open the quotes if you want and say, given 2 countries and 2 commodities, a country should specialize in the production of a commodity in which it incurs the least opportunity cost in comparison with another country. And when you're talking about such a law, we are looking at a country not having the ability to take on almost all commodity, but it should specialize in that one commodity where it has the least opportunity cost when it compares itself with other countries or with any other country. Then for part 2, why do we find it hard to see this law being applied to our country, Uganda? That's the question where they mention any 3 factors which limit the application of comparative cost advantage in Uganda. Now here, we shall look at what limits is to apply, but answers being generated from the way it holds its assumption. So here in Uganda, Uganda participates in multilateral trade, which means that Uganda participates with many other countries. Because it participates with many other countries, then it cannot apply. Remember, the law assumes that there should only be 2 countries. But when you look at our products here, majority of them actually are coming from various nations. Then the other one, existence of international restrictions in international trade makes the law not to be applied here, yet the theory assumes that it can only happen when there are restrictions. There are high transport costs, unlike what the theory assumes no transport costs, but we do have transport costs every time we transact our commodities. Even at your neighbor, you'll hear a borderman telling you, please pay me this because I've used the transport. So transport is part of trade. Then we have currency restrictions and changes in the exchange rates. We have currency restrictions in this country, and then our exchange rates are usually not the same. If you have watched TV business segment, which I encourage you to watch so that you get more informed, you'll discover that the journalists show us on a daily how the exchange rates keep changing, a sign that they are not stable, like the developer of the theory assumed, so it doesn't apply. Then Uganda does not experience constant costs like the theory assumes. Our costs keep on changing. And then technology is not constant in Uganda. It therefore keeps changing. Yet it assumed that there is always constant technology. And the other limitation, preference of money trade or monetary trade to better means of trade makes the theory not to be applied. We prefer to exchange our trade using money than the earlier method or the commonest traditional method of using barter means of trade. So candidates, here you look at the limitation, but you will bring them, bringing them to Uganda, and because it was a question of paper too. Shamilre, let's go on. What is meant by economic development planning? Now, when we are defining economic development planning, there are certain words that will have to be emphasized, which we call keywords. And one of those will be deliberate. Because when government is planning, it is doing it intentionally or officially. It does not just come from nowhere. So here we defined and said it refers to the deliberate and continuous government effort to influence, direct, and control major economic variables such as investment, etc., to achieve economic objectives in the country in a given period of time. Dear candidates, like national income, even planning has a time frame. So it will be imperative for you not to forget the word given period of time, because at least we know there are what we call short-term plans or long-term plans. Planning takes over time. But here we are looking at government influencing, then afterwards it can direct and then give in a bit of control in a form of variables. We have cited only one as an example. Whenever it does such three things, there is an intention of it. And the intention is usually, we have termed them as economic objectives or development objectives, something like that. Then Roman 2, Shamid with Roman 2, they asked us to state 3 factors that affect implementation of development plans in Uganda. Dear candidates of Senior 6, please bail us, because we want us to handle economics as if it is geography. Economics is economics. When you do general paper, geography, I don't know other subjects, the word affect will mean something different. But for us in economics, when they bring affect, please help us not fail affect anymore, because we said affect is the same as influence, is the same as determine. And because the examiners know that you are targeted to only seeing the word determine influence, they then dwell much on bringing such scenario questions where they bring affect. But just know that it is a neutral side or neutral point kind of presentation. So affect is neutral. It's in other words means influence or determine. So state the 3 factors that determine or influence implementation of development plans. Now here, when you are writing, you have seen me say the 3 factors that affect implementation of development plans in Uganda, then you go on. Kindly present it like that. There is nothing you'll use. You'll actually be motivating yourself, plus the one who will mark you, and knowing that this student knows what he's doing. Let's discourage ourselves from just coming from nowhere and begin answering. You don't lose anything to introduce. So here we are looking at things like availability of funds. And if it were section B, we would now know you're going to balance the explanation. But because here we are stating, we're looking at availability of funds, availability of data. Then when they are planning, they look at the degree of responsiveness of the private sector in Uganda. And then we look at the degree of political interference. Either side, we shall see the high degree affects and the low degree positively influences. The level of government commitment. Then we have rate of inflation. The high rate is a bit costly. The low rate is welcomed. Then degree of dependence on external factors. We all know when we are planning, there's an external hand. Even when we are reading the budget, you will see a section that shows that we shall linger on outside funding. But too much of it ends up affecting our plans, because some of that aid is actually tied, but also it has those conditions. Then we have level of accountability, which is the same as corruption. So for people who are used to writing corruption, you can say level of corruption, it is okay. Then we have natural factors, especially when you are linking them to plans from agriculture. Then we have level of infrastructure development. And then we have level of conservatism. The list is endless. And because we are in section A, it is equally good. We give a few numbers. They ask for 3, you can give 4. Then to wind up section A, we also brought some other part. If you realize the other first part we handled was paper 2 question, then we look at the one where there is paper 1, we say differentiate between resale price maintenance and reserve price. I insist, write correctly the spelling. It is not maintenance, it's maintenance. So it refers to where the manufacturer or producer sets the price at which a commodity is to be sold, not ID, but it is to be sold to the final consumer. So the one in the chatting, you'll correct us that word is after commodity. Now in this one, the manufacturer is the one sets the price, and usually this price is always the same everywhere, whether in a small or big town. The examples we usually give are for newspapers. When you buy New Vision or Monitor, you discover that the price is already fixed on top of the page. If someone finds you asking how much is the paper, then he knows probably you are not aware, but the price is clear because it is indicated. So that's an example of resale price maintenance. While reserve price, we usually say is a minimum or lowest or least. Don't use the 3 words. Choose any one. Because we are in a discussion, that's why we are putting any of the 3, but choose one. Minimum or lowest or least possible price the producer is willing to accept to sell or exchange his commodity. Some other students will say is the lowest price below which the producer is not willing to supply. Almost such a discussion will also be given a mark, but here we are looking at that argument by a producer who comes up and says, I am not going below such a price. That is where I am stopping. So he gives you the lowest price so that as you try to go below that such a price, you are affecting his ability to actually get profits. Then Roman 2, they asked to give merits of resale price maintenance in an economy, I guess. When you are writing merits, dear candidates, we use present tense. And under this, we expect a verb to have an S thereafter. Train yourself to do that. For example, reduces stiff competition between small scale and large scale retailers, because these two will no longer now be competing. So if one is selling just those street vendors you find, or the ones who sell the newspapers, some have 6 of the booklets, others have a pile, but they'll still have no competition in between. It ensures stability in market prices because the manufacturer will set the price and the prices are not going to keep on changing. Then it saves time that would be wasted in bargaining, because you can't bargain on something that has already been fixed. If a daily monitor or New Vision is 2,000, there's no way you will say, I have 1,500. Someone will tell you, walk away. The price is already indicated. You either pay for it or go away. That's why in most cases, when you go to buy such newspapers, you just stop at any supermarket, grab one and go. There's no time to bargain. The set price is already there. So there's some time saved that you would waste when you are bargaining, as opposed to the other markets where we go to the market and we are buying our, tin of Irish, and then you talk to that lady or man, I can offer this and this. There's a time that goes on and it is wasted. Then enables producers to calculate easily the revenue they have to generate from the sale of such a commodity, because the price is there. Once, for example, the newspaper, guys will simply say, how many have we printed? 10,000. Then they multiply how much they expect. It is easier. And then reduces consumer exploitation in form of increased prices. So you'll not be cheated because you will already know that the price is fixed. So there will not be any cheating. My answers are in present tense. Define the term product differentiation. This one is under market structures. And if you remember, your teachers must have taught you about monopolistic competition, and we are seeing it also slightly being used under oligopoly, especially under imperfect oligopoly. So here, a student can say product differentiation refers to act by producer to make similar products appear unique in order to appeal to the target markets and distinguish them from their competitors. So under differentiation, we are looking at products being the same. They are all selling detergents, Omo, Nomi, Ariel, name it, Sunlight. But how will they appear different? That is the second part they are asking. Someone gives it a name to distinguish it from the rest. So by mere branding it and packaging it, as our answers are suggesting, you are actually differentiating. By using different colors, you have seen soap farms. Some of them have blue, others choose white, others choose brown. You know, all that is a form of differentiation. You have seen some of them using a particular design. Someone will use a tin because people will be interested in carrying and using the tin thereafter, so they rather go for the normie. Others will use circuits because it is light as a way. Others will use particular trademarks that identify them, so that when someone says that you're buying mineral water, Renzoli has such a label as a trademark. So as you buy, someone will say, I want the other type of water which has such a trademark. So you are trying to make the product look unique from the other people, and you have a particular audience you are targeting. Then what is meant by marginal propensity to import? We saw the other parts of MPC. Now here it comes for the import. Refers to the proportion of additional income that is meant for importation. Just like I encourage you to read those concepts, it will be very bad for candidates to fail such things. And then Roman 2 was asking about some calculation where they told us to calculate the equilibrium, the final equilibrium national income, given that the initial equilibrium national income was 200 billion pounds. Then increase in investment expenditure was 10 billion pounds, and then the marginal propensity to consume was 80%. Then they told us to calculate the final level of national income. That means when somebody invested and added some 10 billion, it is assumed to have created an impact, because when you are looking at multipliers, we usually say under multipliers, we look at the number of times that expenditure multiplies to give or generate a final change in income. So here, the key things is that you have to put the formula first. The formula I have said, you get the final equilibrium income where you shall get the initial equilibrium level. Then we shall add the change, what would have summed as a change in income, because we want to see how that income is impacted or whatever the type of expenditure. That's why he said we bracketed it by looking at the multiplier, then times the change in investment, or times the something that is being talked about as in this case it was investment expenditure. But because we want to get this figure finally, we shall have to first look at the multiplier. When they give us MPC, the multiplier, we usually get that formula and say 1/1 minus MPC. The MPC is the component which is in terms of percentage. And our percentage is 80%. Dear candidates, when someone gets 80%, 80% in our P2 work, the primary teachers used to tell us it is 80/100. When you go to senior 4, we don't waste time to say 8/100. We simply say, how many did you get? You say 0.8. If it is 20%, 0.2. If it is 40%, 0.4. So that is the reason why I have said it's 1/1 minus 0.8. And below there, when you do the calculation, you get 1/1 minus 0.2. Then when you divide 1/0.2, you will get 5, I guess. which will be the figure for the multiplier above. Then we multiply it by the unit of the investment, which was 10, and then we shall add it to the original national income level, the initial income level, which was 200. Now here they have used the pounds as a symbol. What you do, you also put it there. Please, members, put it there. But these figures, after when you add, it is supposed to give you units put. So here I did not put the units, but below there should be 250 billion pounds. When we are pronouncing, it comes first, but when we are writing finally on the figure, it should be billion. Once it is not listed there, you are going to miss something. So you have to put 250 billion pounds. So let's put that billion in our various discussion. Then teacher Midway, we go on. Then we have that other part which was asking about. Yes, teacher Stephen, thank you. You have made it clear, but the pound thing was supposed to be there also. Define the term foreign aid. Now, there are quite definitions that are okay with this. So we will look at foreign aid as a international transfer of resources to a country, and we have said either directly from one country to another, or indirectly through what we call international agencies. So we are looking at transfer of resources. The resources are quite many. We are looking at resources like, it's not only funds, members. If we look at resources like technical one, you hear US giving us equipment, probably going to fight Al-Shabaab. That's an international, that's foreign aid. If we have skilled labor, that is also foreign aid. So it's not only money, it should be in terms of other. If we get relief aid, these people who come from other regions where they have wars and then they come here, they don't have food, and other countries come and give us indirectly through such agencies, World Health Organization, all that is foreign aid. But the key word here, members, is on Roman 2, where they say give 3 motives of giving aid to developing economies. In other words, here we are looking at the reasons or motives which go to the side of the ones who donate. A key word here, members, is that take concern on areas where they ask the motives of receiving. The motives of receiving are different from motives of giving. So in another scenario where they would give you motives of receiving, these answers will not work, the ones I have posted here. So let's take concern of that. So here we are specifically looking at those other people who give. What do they want? What are their aims? So one is for humanitarian reasons, and it has another version of it, but we shall go for the easier one because they look at us as human beings also and say, oh, these people, they need assistance. They cannot handle rubbish properly and it ends up killing them. We rather give them assistance on how to handle them and they become better. Then to foster international relations, sometimes when they are giving assistance, they are looking at a scenario where they want to create a relationship, because usually when someone gives you something, you actually develop a relationship. But here, the keyword is international relations. It is the reason why you see countries like US, even when they have a beef over one country, when they change presidents, you see one going to another country to create that relationship. There should be something like you give in and then another person gives you something. Then sometimes they give us to dictate policies in the recipient countries, especially that are political. In our countries that are developing, they may want you to emphasize democracy. Then the only way they can do that is when they get something they give you, and in return, you practice what they want. Or sometimes they may want to extend social and cultural ideologies. They may want you to behave like them socially, but also culturally. If you remember one time when Barack Obama was the president of US, he went to Kenya and actually asked the Kenyans to stop the female, kind of circumcision, and you remember what response the Kenyan president by then responded to him. But sometimes they won't give us assistance to ensure that they see us practice some ideologies coming from their side, and a little bit of dropping what they think is not appropriate. Then the other one is to consolidate their economic and commercial interests. They may have certain investments, and then they say, how best can we show that we are with them economically? They give us assistance to consolidate on such interests. Then to create employment opportunities, not for us here, but for their nationals. The other nationals who come, that's when they come and give you assistance. Then they tell you, if you are going to we are going to construct a road for you in Tebe Express, for instance, we advise that the people who will come as engineers will come from our side. So they have indirectly created jobs for their nationals. Then sometimes they do it to extend military influence in the developing countries. That's why you see countries like US have what we call military bases almost all over the world, to simply show that they are having an upper hand in terms of the military everywhere. So then lastly, comprehensive planning. Dear candidates, when you see planning, even your answering is supposed to start with planning. But if it were comprehensive plan, you would have said it's a plan. That's why you saw me saying comprehensive planning refers to planning, which covers all sectors and areas of the economy. And that's all. Then state 3 challenges faced in implementation of comprehensive plans in developing countries. Now here, you just state the challenge directly. And like we have said, you said the 3 challenges faced in implementation of comprehensive planning, then you go on. So we have inadequate funds to support the plans. Then we have inadequate data or information on areas of saving or investment or employment. We don't have enough information about that one. So even implementing becomes difficult. Then we have natural calamities that do affect some of our plans. Then we have interference by politicians, where especially the ones that are on the opposition side, in most cases, come and do away with almost all set plans by government. High rates of inflation that makes our plan is a bit costly, and then budgeted in a way that is expensive. High corruption levels where public funds are diverted to personal use, and then our plans don't come out well. The high population growth rates do present what we call high dependence burdens. Then poorly developed infrastructures, which make the cost of implementation a bit expensive, but also be hindering the mobility to different areas by the planners. Then we have limited goodwill by the people when they do not welcome the plans by government. You have already seen this, especially in developing countries. They put up plans like to carry out massive, immunization. And someone brings a culture story. In my culture, they cannot immunize me. So it means it's not aligning with government. Then limited labor skills. Some of the planners are not that skillful to even know how to convince the public, but also to carry out these plans up to a grassroots level. And sometimes even the bureaucratic delays, which we call red tape, where plans go through a long procedure to be approved and it delays implementation. Quite a number, but for that sake, we put it on hold. So we have spent nearly an hour in A, and what we are learning is that we are learning 2 things. One, to use a separate, rather qualifying word, a separating word, which is while. We are learning to give members more than they required. When they ask to give 4, when they ask to give at least an excess. But you're also learning where are marks scored in most cases if it comes to keywords. So teacher, let's go now to the other segment that really brings trouble to us. That is section B. Now under section B, we I tried to sample a few things of areas. It may not exhaust all topics, but we are doing our best to at least tackle different areas. Now here, we are looking at a scenario of presentation where even the marks are allocated. Why may the supply of a commodity not increase despite increase in its price? And they put 10 marks. Now, if you look at the interpretation of this question, from the law of supply, we're told by our teachers that the law of supply states the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied, and the lower the price, the lower the quantity supplied, ceteris paribus. But we are looking at the price of the commodity this time being high or increasing, but these supply members who are the producers are not supplying, which means it is looking at the cases of scenarios of abnormal supply curves. Those are the conditions. And where need be, you will even attach an illustration. That's why in this subject, we encourage to add or use illustration. You'll be given a bonus for it. So here, the first scenario is the supply curve of labor. And some books call it the backward bending supply curve of labor. Under this, we are discussing that with labor, once he has a preference of leisure to work, you will discover that when he has not got the work, he's very willing to work, and he actually says, I'll work at any one time you want me. Then you tell him, you shall work from Monday up to Saturday. He works, but when he realizes that he has had enough income, he now gives excuses and begins to come up with ideas of, I need a one-off, because he has discovered that he needs to enjoy leisure time. So even when you give this person more money, you look at a Saturday being encroached upon, or a Sunday he has to go out with someone. So it brings a scenario that even if you keep on giving this person money, you will say, no, I still need to enjoy my money. So that is an explanation in relation to the supply curve of labor. Or sometimes they work when they have a target to fulfill. That's why I said it is because of also presence of target workers. And when they fulfill their target, after fulfilling their target, then they do not want to go on with labor services. Someone comes in a place of work and says, if I can get a piece of land from this organization using the salary I get here, that will be my end. So after fulfilling his target, he's not ready to go on with such work. Or sometimes it is because of effect of old age, because with age, it usually affects labor. As you grow up, you may not be used to waking up, as a labor ethos usually call for such. So someone says you shall work, we shall expect you to reach home at 6 a.m. You could do that when you're young, but as you reach of age, you say, no, I can't wake up like that, or we shall leave late. It is the reason why in most cases, financial institutions recruit mostly young people almost on and on, not because they don't want old people, but there's too much work associated with such that a person who is of age will not be willing to be subjected to such treatment. Then the other reason is the supply rigidities, which we know are always brought about by drought. Sometimes if there's a long drought season, and even when the price increases, you will not, for instance, order the supply to increase, because it will depend on natural factors, or because of the political instabilities, where an area has quite a number of goods to be supplied, but when there is an instability, it will not be easy for you to bring goods on board because of a political instability, insurgence. Then we have supply of land. With land, it cannot be increased from one place to another in terms of moving it, because it is a fixed resource. God created land in a fixed resource. Where it is where it is. You cannot move the land of Kitigum you're assuming it is cheap, and then you bring it to Mbale, it is fixed in that case. So that's why you see there are variations in terms of costing, but because they are fixed by nature. Then you have expectation of future price changes, which we call speculation. We have said it makes the producers to put less of the goods on the market with anticipation that they will gain more profits in the future. So that increment may be there, especially with the producers of cereals, but someone says, yes, today they are saying maize is 600 shillings. Then I'm being told I anticipate 1,000 in December. So he waits because he anticipates, he speculates that maybe by December they will still be scarce. So it may be that there is a small increment, but when in actual sense someone expects a better price, so supply will not increase. Then we have supply of perishable goods. For perishable goods, they are not immediately supplied, rather they are more immediately supplied after harvest, particularly because they are going to get bad. So you rather supply them just because you see that they are going to get spoiled, and you may discover that you are looking at a reason of not losing them out. Then you have exhaustion of raw materials, where we said quantity supplied may not increase because producers may not have the requirements to produce their final goods and services, rather final goods. So in most cases, there are scenarios where the producers need raw materials, but when the raw materials are over and then they are exhausted, supply may not increase. It is supplied by government. Usually government decides to supply essential commodities the nationals. Let's go on, Teacher Mildred, to part B. Then what can we do to increase supply of commodities in a country, in an economy? So here, members, they have told us to discuss the measures that can be taken. In most cases, in paper 1, the tenses that are going to govern will be suggestive tense, where we expect questions of suggesting, like here we are being told to suggest. When we are suggesting, we are advising that use present tense when you are writing an answer, but below that, before that, you have written something like an introduction, where we say the following are the suggested measures to increase supply. And then thereafter, follow it with either can or should or may. And it's a new trend where now, because we are suggesting something that will work in the future, even will is okay. So you should not worry about it. Now here, the question is playing around with the factors that make supply to be positive. So here, that's why we look at things like improve technology levels. And as you improve technology levels, when you're explaining, you have to say, this can increase on efficiency of workers, which may lead to increase in the supply of commodities. So you have seen me, I am writing present tense, then thereafter, I follow it with a can or should. Please emphasize that one. Otherwise, sometimes even when you say government, or there should be improved technology, it is also okay. But because you may not be marked by somebody who may take your time to look at whether the tense is reflected, this is a bit advisable, the way I've presented the answers. If you look at expand market size, this will encourage more production, which will lead to increased profitability by the suppliers, which may lead to increase in supply. Then ensure political stability. This will give confidence to suppliers as they will not fear to lose their lives and property, which will encourage more production and lead increase in supply. If you look at workers, we have said improve workers' fringe benefits, because workers are part of the factors that we base on if you are to improve supply. This will motivate the workers to increase output, which will lead to increased productivity and increase in supply. Then offer subsidies to producers. What is the importance of this? This will lower or reduce the costs of production to the suppliers as they become cheaper producers, which will lead to increase in supply of a commodity. Then modernize agriculture, and here we are specific by using, we can use irrigation methods to regulate more supply of agricultural products on the market. Then improve infrastructures. This will reduce on the cost of doing business of supply, but also will increase on mobility or movement of goods in areas that are in plenty to areas that are scarcity. Then offer investment incentives to producers, and then avail affordable loans to investors, anything that makes supply to be positive. But the key word is we are focusing on the tense. Here, members, the tense here is very key, and treat yourself to such a presentation. You will find that even when it is paper 2, you will never fail such a presentation. Otherwise, students think that every time you say, government, no, you present like this, then follow it with that. And because we have nearly 1.5 months anyway, we can train ourselves. You write somewhere and show your teacher, and your teacher will guide you better. When you learn this one, you will find that you will not fail paper 2, where we expect almost all the 4 tenses to appear. But for this case, in paper 1, they'll ask a simple tense and then this suggestive tense. That's all. So walk in the morning knowing that this is what is going to appear, the tense. Otherwise, for the afternoon, that's where we see present continuous, where we see ing coming, past perfect or past tense have been. There we shall see later how to handle that one. But here, for suggestive tense, present, as long as you have written above and say the following are measures that have been suggested. That's why I'm training you. Train yourself to start with an introductory statement. You do not lose anything, because it helps you even to guard your points and even avoid those kind of repetitions. So Mildred, let's go on. Members, I am seeing the areas that are in the chat, but kindly I will attend to them when I am done, because I want to handle something. I want to handle something big, but trust me, I'll handle them. So here we have distinguishing between output approach and income approach as used in economics. When you are doing such approach work, these are methods that we use when you're actually handling national income. Basically, there are 3. We have output, income, and then expenditure. Now, output approach has another name. Sometimes some books call it product or value added. So for you, what you do, you look at the keywords when you are separating, because these are 4 marks for God's sake. Just define and stop there. Again, we are emphasizing, put the separating word in the middle of the line. Dear members, don't use but, don't use although. Those are pamphlet things. Ignore them. We are calling out this one because we don't want you to lose marks. And for this reason, you must behave like somebody who is going to get married. He listens to all the last words. So when you hear us emphasize certain things, we have a reason. The separating word, let it be while. Leave your pamphlet things. of however, of but. No, insist on the while. So output approach involves adding up of money value of all final goods. Now, the key word is final. If you don't put final goods, you will not get a mark. Why? Because when we are looking at such national income estimation, we actually look out for the final goods. Reason that we even have intermediate goods. That's why later we emphasize something like intermediate problem of double counting. So because we don't want to face it, that's why we say of final goods and services from all productive activities in an economy in a given period of time, usually a year. So even if you say in a given period of time, it is okay. What you must remember, like planning, like a budget, even a national income is time bound. If you forget about time, you have a penalty. So time should not be forgotten. While with income approach, we look at adding up all incomes earned by the factors of production in a particular period, usually a year. The factors of production we are talking about, we have land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. If it were something else to go on, we would even add on and say it is given by adding up W, which is wage, plus I, which is interest, plus R, which is rent, plus P, which is the profit. But for this case, these are 4 marks. Please stop there and handle that. Then for part B, explain the factors that influence gross domestic product in developing countries. Now here, members, the marks are 16. This topic of national income is more or less the same with economic growth when you are trying to explain, because here what we are mentioning, we said influence is the same as affect, is the same as determine. Under these areas, we are emphasizing presentation of a neutral point. Then after a neutral point, we expect you to balance very well the points. And when you are balancing these points in a national income, one of the things they will penalize you with is when you correlate, which I want to discourage you from actually all. These days, economics no longer accepts correlation. So if a student simply says the size of the market, the bigger the market, the larger, that is 0. So here, when you're mentioning your point, mention the point, put a full stop. You're earning a mark for mentioning a point. Avoid this marathon presentation when a question is going to ask 2 sides. Let the point be clearly seen. When you're explaining, if you have used the size, then we have 2 sizes, for God's sake. There's a big size and a small size. And when I'm teaching my students, I always tell them, we have a musician called Bebe Cool. He calls himself big size. At least remember about him and say, hey, every time I find a point of market, I'll always say big size of a market. Then the opposite of big size is small. So when you are looking at the market, you say a big size of the market encourages more production. Why? Due to increased profit margin by the producers, which leads to increased output, which then leads to high GDP. In this case, we are talking of national income. Every point, there is a reason why I'm explaining it. That is the logic behind the point. But there should be a reflection of output in each of these points, because national income looks at measurement of goods and services, which is the output. Then while a smaller market size reduces output level, why? Due to reduced profit margin by the producers, which leads to reduced output of goods and services, then leading to low GDP. Then when you look at level of exploitation and the utilization of resources, when you're explaining level of exploitation, you're going to explain high level of resource exploitation, which leads to increased output, and then later on leads to high national income, while low level is the other way around. So throughout the points here, When you look at level of savings, take on high level of savings leads to provision of high investment funds for investment, which leads to increase the production of goods and services, which then leads to high GDP. While low level, then you go on like that. If we are talking of level of entrepreneurial ability, usually the high level of entrepreneurial ability leads to the better organization of factors of production, which leads to increased investment and high output of goods and services, then which leads to high national or GDP. So a key word in almost these points is that majority of what you are going to handle will focus on presentation of a point, then show how the point is without correlation. These things of the higher, please ignore. We are not also speculating. We have not heard me say, if, avoid those concepts for people who still write such answers. If the price, if the level is this, no. Please avoid that one. Then for government policy, or rather population growth rates, you look at the high population growth rates, which leads to increased dependency burden, which then lowers savings, then which reduces investment, which leads to low production of goods and services, and then leading to low national income. While controlled population growth rates or low population growth encourages savings, which leads to increased investment, like that. Then for political climate, everywhere you'll find it, whether economic growth, whether what. Please start with the political stability attracts investors since they are assured of security, first of all, for their lives, and safety of property, which leads to increased investment, production of goods, and then high national income or high GDP. Then political instability discourages, first of all, investors. Why? Due to fear of losing lives and destruction of property. Then labor skills, the same applies. You'll have to, so throughout all these points, I have written just a list of them, but the key word is they must be presented in a neutral nature. Then all of a sudden you emphasize the fact that you are going to balance the explanation in terms of balancing it without correlation. I hope I'm clear. Then I am seeing in the chats, someone says, what if you say political atmosphere instead of political climate? It is very okay. Mary Okot, it is very okay. There's no problem. Then another person says, what is the best word to separate two-sided explanation? What is the best word to separate two-sided explanation? I don't know what you meant, but for me, my point was that when you say two-sided explanation, you balance them without correlation. Correlation is when you say size of the market, the higher the size of the market, the higher that is, you are correlating. You are not generating a reason out of that. Then another one says, what is the minimum number of points needed for 16 marks? We usually advise and say, please do not limit yourself. That's why in most cases when you enter this room and they say start, I insist, do not start with section A. Why? Section A is going to tease you. Give it time that you'll do it last. Begin with section B. Why? You are planning. Those 10 minutes you are taking on will actually tell you that, A, I don't have these many points. I rather choose another number. And for us, because we say we want you to pass, don't say after all majority guides say 8 times to know. Write your ability. Why? One of the points may be wrongly explained, but the other one brings out your point very well. So write as many as you can. Then another one says about market. Can't I say large market size and small market size? It is very okay. Big size and large market is the same. Amelia, thank you. Then another one says, if I am asked 3 effects of rapid population growth rates, is it a must to say the 3 effects of rapid population growth include, or even if I say the effects? No, it is always good in our presentation when you say the 3 effects, then for you say you start. But likewise, even if you say the effects of, there's no problem. You are just becoming an orderly person. Just like you're going to university, after this year, next year, you're going to present what we call dissertations or coursework. One of the requirements that you'll get marks later on will be a basis of how you actually have handled the essay. So this one will be a good essay. Then David Awan, I think you are just okay with me. Then the message says, how about if we include the tense right from the point statement? Wouldn't that be better? I don't know which tense you are talking about, but for me, I was talking about the suggestive tense. I think that's where message you were asking, where I said present it in by writing the following are the suggested, then for you start on. Or else, if you are used to the other system of government should, but we want you to avoid that monotonous element so that you become easier to handle even the afternoon paper. Blessing was just greeting us. Then I see do I have to specify the number of points required in section A when introducing my answers? I said no. When they ask 3, please give at least an excess of 2. To be safe, why? We always insist that 1 may be wrong. Then another one was about multiplier. Someone says, some books say we should not use the word times instead. Kindly elaborate more on that. I think it is common that majority books, Dixon, are focusing on the times because we are looking at how many that is something you are talking about keeps on multiplying. So it is very okay. I don't see any problem with it. Teacher Stephen corrected us. Then the rest. So members, let me continue.
Teacher Noah? Let's give him some few minutes. He's getting back. He's getting back. Okay. Teacher Noah has got some network issues. Let me check.
Teacher Noah was heading to level of labor skills. When you talk about labor skills, we could call it all level of education. and training. When we talk about level of education and training, we have to bring in the efficiency, the productivity. So for the positive part, we could say the highly skilled labor force is more efficient and highly productive. This brings about more output produced and yet of high quality, thus a high level of GDP. But then on the other hand, we could say low level of skills of labor force reduce the efficiency and productivity of labor, resulting into low output produced, thus low GDP. And then someone was asking if we could use a separating word for the positive and for the negative part when we're asked factors influence or affect or determine. We could use the however. We could say, as for this point of labor, we could say highly skilled labor force, the positive part, you explain it maximally, and then we could separate it with however, and then we bring in the negative part of low level of skills. And then you're talking about labor skills. In your point, endeavor to bring in the efficiency and productivity. It should always be there. And then we could go ahead to rate of inflation. When you're talking about inflation, inflation is about an increase in the prices of commodities. And when there is an increase in the price of commodities, it will lead to a high cost of production. And this will obviously discourage investment. So for the point of rate of inflation, we could say high rate of inflation discourages investment because of the high cost of production and low profit level. So this obviously leads to a low GDP since there are few products that are produced. And then, however, the low rate of inflation encourages investment because of the low cost of production. If there are low cost of production, that means producers will produce a high level of output. And if there is a high level of output, there is a high GDP in the country. I'll hand over to Teacher Noah.
Thank you, Teacher Mildred. Thank you very much. Sorry for the, when I went into the chats, I just got lost. And that's why I was apologizing that I want to go to the chats later on. But thank you very much for filling in. Then the rest of the question, Teacher Mildred, I think because there was limited time, Teacher Stephen did not share them on the screen, but I'm sure the audience there has the questions, because we have a question concerning I don't know whether you can share any question number for the merits of inflation in developing countries. Somewhere in the first, I don't think Teacher Stephen has it, but I'm sure the questions he shared first included such a number where we were asked to discuss the demerits of inflation in the developing countries. And then the part B of it was asking the measures that can be taken to reduce inflation. Now here, majority students miss out marks just because of the explanation. And I am asking kindly to follow the way Teacher Mildred was explaining, is that when we are talking of the merits of inflation, we are actually targeting the hyper one, because the hyper one is the one that we don't want. Why? Is the prices are running at a very high speed, and because we are handling the merits, use present tense. So you will say, for example, leads to high costs of production. That is your point. Now, when you are explaining, you say this is in form of increased costs on raw materials and inputs, which forces farms to close down, and you wind up with the effect of closing down, which leads to unemployment. Because as farms close down, just because they cannot manage the costs due to inflation, people lose the jobs. So the point is, leads to high costs of production. Then discourages lending as creditors stand to lose in real terms. The point is, discourages lending as creditors stand to lose in real terms. And then when we're explaining, we just say those who lend money get it less in real terms due to a fall in money value, thus discouraging lending by creditors and or stock financial institutions. In other words, those who lend after discovering that by the time you'll have to pay back, you'll pay them less than what they gave you because of inflation, they will get discouraged to lend. Then inflation leads to uneven distribution of income. That is the point. Leads to uneven distribution of income. And then when you're explaining, you'll simply say it redistributes incomes from the fixed income earners and peasants and the businessmen, which in most cases ends up worsening the two situations of the two people. Because why is it that this income, the fixed income earners, for them, their incomes are fixed, just like you hear the word fixed. They give you a job and they tell you you're supposed to earn such money. But meanwhile, prices are keeping on increasing. As they increase, even the peasant and the other people will lag behind, but the business person, for them, they go with the changes. So they earn more than the ones whose incomes are fixed, especially the ones whose incomes are fixed. We usually give examples to do with the salary earners. Your incomes are salary earners are usually put in the contracts, and they tell you we shall pay you that money from January to December, and doesn't change. And yet prices of food are increasing, school fees is increasing, rent is increasing, but your income is not increasing. But meanwhile, the businessmen, for them, they go with the changes in price. So the gap ends up being widened. Then encourages capital outflow or worsens the BOP problem. So when we are explaining, we simply say it discourages exports. Why? As exports become more expensive, and instead encourages importations which are cheaper. It then leads to import expenditures being higher because nationals now prefer to buy goods that come from outside, and yet they are using this money that goes outside to bring the other goods. So that's when the capital outflow comes up. Then inflation encourages malpractices, or some books say illegal activities. It's okay. And we are mentioning things like gambling, smuggling, corruption. All those you are mentioning are not allowed. Now, why? People resort to such activities to survive alongside the high cost. But the end result is that it becomes costly in terms of revenue loss. So someone says, I rather pick something from somebody to survive. And that's when corruption comes up. Then inflation makes future government planning difficult. That is the point. Makes future government planning difficult. And why? It is because the money value is eaten up by inflation, especially when plans take long to be implemented. So as you fulfill those long-term plans, it is not easy for you to know how much it will cost. The fact that these prices keep what? Changing. Then it worsens unemployment problem. And the reason is, it is because it reduces the levels of investment and production as a result of increased cost of production also reduces, leading to closure of some of the farms, and then unemployment happens. Get that simple explanation. If you write the next point and say, discourages savings, that is the point. How? This is due to constant loss of money value. And under constant loss of money value, people prefer spending their incomes on consumption rather than saving it, because someone thinks that even if you save it, but you have a duty or obligation to fulfill of spending, so it forces people not to save. Now, nearer to that is also discourages investment in an economy. And under investment in an economy as a point, it discourages both local and foreign investors. Why? Due to high costs of production and then failure by the entrepreneurs to predict future prices. So the investors never want to spend money too much than what they anticipate to get as a profit. But where there is inflation, local people will complain they cannot benefit anymore. The cost somehow becomes high, but also the foreigners. Then inflation leads to political tension and unpopularity of the government. And in here, we usually say the high prices create some bit of discontent among people as a result of the increased cost of living. Sometimes they resort to striking or demonstrations. You have heard of in our country where the traders in Kampala wanted to meet His Excellency the President, and there was some bit of tension because it made some shops to be closed. That's what we are talking about. And as you would sample from a few, some of them would say, government is not treating us well. That's why you say unpopularity. Then leads to consumption of poor quality goods. If you're hearing me, dear candidates, I'm not wasting time with the words. More to that, you wait for other subjects. For us, we want the point. Leads to political, rather leads to consumption of poor quality goods, full stop. The point is consumption of poor quality goods. Why? This is due to increased costs of production, which forces producers to also produce poor quality goods so as to reduce the cost of production. In other words, you are forced to consume poor quality goods because even the producer has done it. So if you have seen an example of the bread makers, they have resorted to making small buns without some of the ingredients they add. If they used to put anything like an ingredient, they remove a bit of yeast or vanilla. Some of them who are that marketing their products, because they are discovering when you put a lot and yet you are benefiting less, you actually lose out. Then people are strained in an attempt to cope up with the rising cost of living. So some people fail to afford the basics of life due to high prices, leading to decline in their welfare. In other words, people struggle to maintain their life. If they have been used to having 5 meals a day during inflationary situations, they choose to miss out on some. That's when you hear someone taking a chapati and beans and sleeps, but yet there would be a scenario of him going for food. He cannot afford all the meals. Where possible, people who stay in towns, they walk some journey because he doesn't have that daily money to use kind of in a taxi. Then it promotes speculation in an economy, and that is negative, where we say businessmen create artificial shortages by hoarding. Hoarding means hiding goods in anticipation of making high profits, hence leading to increase in the cost of living. So the businessmen create what we call artificial shortage. They hide the goods themselves so that they create a scenario that the goods are nowhere to be seen. And you will see this, it happens usually during December time when, for instance, the sugar corporations, slightly, one of them says, we are doing industrial repairs, but it is a way of creating artificial shortage. So we all know nowadays, if you are taking that porridge at school or tea or milk, without sugar, somehow you say, it can't come out well. So, but sugar prices have always hit us in December. But like other goods also, there is that speculation where the businessmen hide it themselves just because of that. Then it leads to industrial unrests, or some of your notes have the word strikes. Here, when we are talking of industrial strikes, we are not talking of strikes in industries, but all working places. So when you're explaining, you say, this is due to constant demand for higher wages, so as to meet the increased cost of living, where workers resort to strikes, sometimes destruction of property, and that is negative. They keep on pestering government to pay them more money. You have at least seen, this is a paper one question, but at least we are talking of even our examples. Remember, we said for us, we don't want your examples in the papers, but at least we are giving them for a discussion to drive the points home. Then it encourages brain drain. And we said skilled manpower search for jobs in other countries where money value is more stable. You hear people going outside because the other countries' incomes or economies are stable. Hence, they want to look for a stable cost of living. And this deprives us the skilled labor force that we have as developing countries, because we lose these people. You have heard of doctors going to Kenya just because things here are not okay, and we lose them out. Then fixed income earners suffer. That's also another disadvantage. And largely this is because the real income falls with a fall in money value, leading to low standards of living. Remember, fixed income earners, like pension earners, for them their incomes are fixed. They never get additional money apart from what was fixed. Yet prices of other commodities in their normal lives keep on increasing. So candidates, my point is write the answer, then learn how to explain it in a simple way. There will be okay. Then for part B, which teacher Mildred has shared, it was asking us to suggest. In the first segment, I talked about suggesting. When we are suggesting, we are actually talking about the tense which we are going to encourage you to use. You write the statement that introduces and say the following are the measures that can be taken to reduce the rate of inflation in developing countries. Now that statement already shows that you are going to suggest. when we are suggesting, I repeat, we are suggesting in present simple tense where you say increase, reduce, improve, provide, liberalize. Then thereafter, you continue with the explanation. That is the best way. So the organizers of this Zoom meeting do not want to bring mediocrity. So when you see us coming back and emphasizing certain things, we want you to be better. Please do what we are saying. Don't do what you feel. That's why some people come in the chat and say, what if? No, follow this one. I say the best is this one, because this is the best that it can handle both papers 1 and 2. In fact, when you answer the one I'm going to present here, you'll just not have issues, because we talked about the difference between the two papers. In most cases, students mess up the afternoon paper, and because they want easy life. So here we are emphasizing you learn how to explain. So what can we do to handle inflation? One, adopt restrictive monetary policy. Adopt restrictive monetary policy. So me, I have avoided the word. The government don't waste time. Adopt is present tense. Then when you're explaining, simply say tools like credit control can be used. You are hearing me using the word can be used to reduce money supply, comma, which can reduce the purchasing power, which will reduce demand pull inflation. In every point, you must come out and show how inflation is supposed to be controlled. So here, when you adopt restrictive monetary policy, it reduces money supply. So, but there is that suggestive word which comes thereafter. Then 2, increase direct taxes on people's incomes. Why? Because people earn a lot, and therefore they bring the other type of inflation called demand pull inflation. So here, increase direct taxes on people's incomes. That is the point. Then this may reduce disposable incomes, which can reduce the purchasing power, and hence will reduce demand for goods and services. Because as our incomes are highly taxed, our ability to buy, which you call purchasing power, is reducing. Then reduce government expenditure. You are hearing me, present tense. Don't waste time. Full stop. And when you're explaining, you say expenditure on non-productive activities can reduce the amount of money in circulation, which will reduce the purchasing power and reduce aggregate demand. Because once government does not spend much money on productive and non-productive activities, we shall not have this money coming up in our hands. That's why I say reduces the amount of money in circulation. Then improve and ensure political stability. What is the importance of this? This will induce investment or attract investment, which may lead to increased production, which can reduce the shortage of goods in an economy. Because once there is good stability politically, the investors will be encouraged to produce. And we are looking at the scarcity inflation coming because of a structural rigidity called political instability being not there. The goods will be in plenty and the prices will be low. Then provide economic incentives to investors. Economic incentives to investors. Here it becomes specific when you're explaining. You say incentives like tax holiday, give one, don't give many, can reduce the cost of production, which will attract investors. This may increase domestic production and hence may control scarcity inflation. So someone who is asking, are we allowed to use may? Yes. Thank you very much. You can also use that one. I insisted on this. You can use may, you can use should. Then liberalize economies, because we are talking of developing countries, to increase production. When we are liberalizing, we are removing unnecessary controls on trade. So here, when you're expanding, you should say the removal of unnecessary barriers to trade will encourage people to invest and produce more goods and services, which may reduce shortage of goods and thus control inflation. Because when there is liberalism, it means there is liberty. That's where the word comes from. You no longer limit people to trade. Then adopt import substitution industries. That is the point. This will ensure that local supply of goods increase to meet local demand, which will control increase in prices. Otherwise, even if someone says this will reduce spending more on imported commodities, which will reduce imported inflation, it is also okay. But here we are looking at adopting import substitution industries. It will ensure local supply of goods to meet the local demand. Then encourage importation from cheaper sources. That is the point. These countries can encourage importation from cheaper sources. What will happen? This will help to supplement local output on domestic market. In other words, they add on to already what is here. You have seen the rice that comes from Tanzania, to the extent that Uganda is called a food hub, because we do not lack food anyway, because we also import from such, which may reduce aggregate demand and hence control price increases. Then develop and improve infrastructure. That's another point. This will facilitate quick movement and distribution of goods where they are scarce, and may encourage production of more goods and hence solve bottleneck inflation. So here we are looking at the transportation of products from where there are many in terms of plenty, but to areas where they are scarce. But that comes when these countries develop and also improve infrastructure. When you develop, you go on to improve. Then privatize state enterprises or public enterprises. What will this one help? This may reduce excessive government expenditure, which will reduce money in circulation, because this time government will not be spending on these parastatals, which may reduce the purchasing power and thus reduce demand pool inflation. Then control government borrowing from the central bank. Control government borrowing from the central bank. This may reduce money in circulation, which will reduce purchasing power and hence reduce the upward pressure on prices, because sometimes inflation comes when there is too much borrowing from the central bank. Then modernize agriculture. Please avoid the pamphlet things which write modernization of. No, it is suggestive. Modernize agriculture, unless when you say modernization of agriculture should be adopted, that one is okay. But because not everyone will do that, follow this other scenario. Then when we modernize agriculture, what will happen? This will increase farm production, which may minimize shortages and hence control scarcity inflation. Then The rest of the points are many under inflation. Dear candidates, go on to explain in that way. For example, reduce indirect taxes on essential goods. What will be the essence of this? Then control issuance of currency. The point is present tense. You talk about undertake price control measures. Now we are in paper one. This point of price control measures will only work in paper one. If this question was brought in paper two, and the student says undertake price control measures, in Uganda we don't have price controls, but because it is paper one, we are advising them. But you become specific on this one. Under price control measures, we are looking at maximum only because it is the one which lowers the price. So here, when you're explaining, you become specific. Then subsidize local producers, then adopt currency reforms. Now, I see our time is coming almost, but let's try our best to push up at least these other numbers before we wind up. We have a number where Teacher Mildred has shared, explain the causes of high rate of economic growth in an economy. Then part B, they asked for what are the implications of high economic growth rates in an economy. If it is brought in the morning, I encourage you to do such a number because you'll discover that for number 5, the easiest part becomes number B, part B. Why? Part B will have two sides where you will not have to give quite a number of points, because if they have said 5 rather 10 marks, they are going to require 5 points, 5 points. You also have to learn how to get these scores. So you look at the question, what causes high rates of economic growth? You'll have to look at the factors that influence economic growth, but in a positive way. Whatever influences positively economic growth is bringing about high economic growth rates. So it is a one-sided question. Then we can think through things like, for part A, what brings about high economic growth rates? Provision of investment incentives to investors. Provision of investment incentives to investors. We are explaining using present tense. This encourages production of more goods since it reduces or lowers the costs of production, which leads to increased output and thus high economic growth rates. Then big market size. This encourages production of more goods by investors due to increased profit margin, which leads to increased output and then higher economic growth rates. Then you talk of low population growth rates. This reduces actually lowers the burden, dependency burden, which increases savings and thus investment funds available, which leads to increased production of goods and then high economic growth rates. Because as the population is not so much, there is no burden that is felt by the country to even encourage the local investors and government itself. Then well-developed infrastructures. Under well-developed infrastructures, members, today I encourage you to use, it lowers the cost of doing business, which encourages more investment and thus increased production of goods and services, and thus leads to high economic growth rates. If you are hearing my explanation, all points of economic growth, I'm linking them with output also, just like we saw in national income. Then improve the state of technology. Like Teacher Mildred said, when you talk about technology, the key word that follows technology is efficiency. So this leads to increased efficiency by labor, which leads to increased output of goods and services, and thus high economic growth rates. Because the use of advanced technology speeds up work. When work is speeded, it means that more output is produced. Then, presence of enough capital stock. Here we are talking about collection. Remember, capital stock is a collection. So you must bring out the element that brings about how this improved capital stock leads to increase the capacity of a country to produce more output and then high economic growth rates. Then high entrepreneurial ability. High entrepreneurial ability leads to better organization of factors of production, which leads to increased output of goods and services, thus high economic growth rates. Then when you talk of high level of monetization, it encourages commercial production, which leads to increased output due to the desire to make more profits, leading to increased investment and the high economic growth rates. Then the high level of savings, these promote increased investment levels, which leads to increased output of goods and services, and thus high economic growth rates. Then this point about corruption, if you say high accountability, it is okay, but majority students are used to the word low levels of corruption. Use that one anyway. This means it makes funds available, especially public funds available, since they are not diverted for public investment, which encourages more investors, since the investors are not asked for bribes, and it encourages, leads to increased output and then high economic growth rates. Then high levels of exploitation of available natural resources is also a point. High levels of exploitation of available resources. Then we have presence of a favorable land tenure system. Presence of a favorable land tenure system. And under here, we are talking about it leads to increased access by investors to proper use of land, which leads to increased production of goods and leads to high economic growth rate. Because under favorable land tenure system, we are looking at the land tenure system that anyone can easily access without restriction. Remember, there are those nature of land tenure systems where they are hard and it creates a hurdle for one to acquire land. Then we have high capital inflow. The inflow of money by foreign investors leads to increase the capital base, which is required to invest more, and this leads to increase in production of goods and services, which leads to high economic growth rates. Then positive attitude towards work, because remember, workers must have the positive attitude towards work, which means it makes them easy to be flexible and allow and adopt quick and modern means of production, which leads to increased efficiency and more production of goods and services and high economic growth rates. Then someone may say stable prices or low rates of inflation. Stable prices or low rates of inflation. Then this lowers the cost of production, especially in terms of the raw materials needed, which encourages more production of goods and services, and then high economic growth rates. Then you talk about the high levels of industrialization. You also talk about the political stability, which we said encourages investors since they are assured of security of their lives, and safety of property, which encourages more investment, and that leads to high economic growth rates. So, Teacher Mildred, I'm sure you are following what is in the chat. This time I'm avoiding it because I know you'll attend to it. And I wanted to go to part B. For part B, like I've said, implications. Whether they will bring them in whichever day, whether morning or afternoon, implications are actually positive and negative, meaning there are good things and bad ones. So what is good that comes from economic growth, and what is bad that comes from economic growth? That's the disadvantages. So when you're presenting, for you call them, show to the examiner the implications are positive and negative. And kindly don't mix, separate them. It is the reason I talked about the planning bit of 10 minutes as you're entering that room at 9 in the morning. Take time and plan. When you're planning, you actually will have a time to separate the plans, rather the positives alone and the negatives. But this thing of mere rating, because it is impulse, it will somehow affect you. So you begin with the positives, and again the tense is present tense. Then later on, you show the negatives. So under economic growth, we talk about increases government revenue. And when we are explaining, this is because of the expanded economic activities that are taxed, as well as the goods that are taxed, plus the incomes that generate more revenue to government. Then improves balance of payment position. When you're explaining, you'll say this is because of the increased export earnings from the goods sold outside, which leads to a better position by a country. Then it reduces income inequalities in an economy, and this is because the economic growth requires a lot of activities which end up swallowing very many numbers of people in various economic activities, and this makes everyone to earn some income, and the income inequality is dealt with. Then it reduces external dependence of a country on other economies. Largely, this is because of increased production of the local commodities that may not call for imported or additional goods coming from outside. Then it makes government in power popular. This is because people become contented with the various economic activities that are going on, and they may not resort to strikes or demonstration, since they are convinced and contented with the earnings. Then another one, economic growth increases utilization of available natural resources. This is because of the need to utilize additional resources as a source of raw materials that end up seeing the investors using the would-be idle resources. Then economic growth encourages development of modern infrastructures, and largely this is because of the need to facilitate more production, where government is compelled to set up such infrastructure to support the economic activities. So it encourages the infrastructures to be in place. Then it leads to development of labor skills. as that's also positive. This is because of the need to utilize skills of labor that require labor to be trained in order to acquire the necessary skills required in producing more goods and services. So eventually labor gets labor skills being developed. Then it reduces conservatism. This is where nationals quickly adopt to use of modern means of production that is required by the economic growth, and they drop their conservative methods of production. Then economic growth leads to industrialization, which we know provides a variety of goods and services. Then this leads to improved standards of living, because usually when there are industries in place, very many, we choose from wherever we want. You make a choice, and then it is always good to have a variety. Then it encourages technological innovation in terms of new advanced means of production that is required by the producers, meaning there is always technological progress in a country. Then economic growth increases in employment levels. It is because of the need to engage in many economic activities. Some people end up in distribution, marketing, or storage of some of these outputs, and the employment is created. Then it controls inflation, and this is because of the increased production of goods that reduces scarcity. That is how you explain that one. Then it leads to political stability. Why does it lead to political stability? It is because it compels government to offer security to the investors in order to carry on their work. So eventually there is always political stability, especially in areas where they are operating. Then widens consumer choices. This is because of production of variety of commodities, and usually with choices we end up benefiting with the improved standards of living. And then we can say results into increased enjoyment of leisure. This is because of the increased earnings that make people desire to use the incomes and the rest in terms of enjoying leisure time. Then for the negatives, which is the negative implications, dear candidates, they can as well be called costs. The next time they will say examine the costs, they are meaning disadvantage or the upside. So economic growth, much as it is okay, it also has its weakness. One of the weaknesses of it is that it leads to rural urban migration and its negative evils. Why? This is because majority of the economic activities are centered in urban areas that attract labor to move from villages to towns. Then it leads to high level of occupational hazards. High level of occupational hazards. High level of occupational hazards, especially accidents in production activities. And this ends up affecting the workers. It is because of the desire to strive to see that production takes place, so people end up working day and night, and the accidents usually happen. You have heard of those accidents that come because of people wanting to meet certain targets. It leads to environmental degradation or social costs in form of pollution, which we say endanger the health of the nationals, just because majority of the economic activities are industrial in nature. Then it leads to exhaustion of non-renewable resources, or some books say, like your teachers gave you, leads to over-exploitation of the natural resources in a desire to maximize more output, and resources end up getting exhausted. Then economic growth leads to profit repatriation. This is because majority of the economic activities tend to be in the hands of foreign investors, who usually take back these earned incomes and profits from back to their mother countries, and we lose out on the capital base. Then economic growth leads to increased dependence on external resources. And this is because it forces countries to borrow in order to sustain the production of commodities. So as countries borrow, they end up spending much outside, but two, they largely depend on outside countries. And we said from your teachers' discussions, there's nowhere you can benefit from dependence, because usually at dependence level, everyone is looking at you having a disadvantage, because you are killing your initiative, you're becoming lazy, you're having conditions tied to you. All of those come from because of external dependence. Then economic growth involves foregoing current consumption in order to save for the future. So you end up seeing people not consuming what they would have consumed now just because they have a target to fulfill ahead. Then economic growth leads to unemployment. This is largely because of the adoption of modern techniques of production required to set up economic activities, which end up replacing or taking over people's jobs, and that's how unemployment comes in place. Then economic growth leads to income disparities or income inequalities. When you're explaining, you say this is due to the uneven benefits that come from economic growth, where some people end up earning more than others, especially those who are not in such work. Then it leads to decline in social and cultural values. This is because economic work or activities involves mixing with other cultures and people from outside that make them to prefer to adopt foreign cultures and drop their own. And so we'll look at cultural erosion finally. Then economic growth leads to imbalance in regional development. This is because certain regions may end up developing more than others where such activities are not taking place. And regional imbalance is very bad because it ends up bringing the migration and with its evils. Then leisure time is foregone, and largely this is because it involves people working beyond the normal working hours in order to strain and achieve certain targets, and this ends up reducing standards of living, because when people are not resting, even if they earn more money, it will not bring out the rhythm of resting, because we say human beings need such. Then economic growth also leads to displacement of people. This is because of the need to set up investments where people end up being relocated to other places and they lose out on their land. Case in point, you have heard and watched on TV how people have been displaced because of either need to put up investment, but we said we don't need those examples. So Teacher Mildred, step in a bit, like 1-2 minutes, and you react to those in the chats as I finish something small in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I saw in the chat people were asking about a tense, but then when we are answering questions, we should always follow the tense in the question. We shouldn't claim that this tense is in paper 2 or what. Always read the question, understand it, and use the tense that has been used in the question. And then another question I'm seeing, are we allowed to use it when stating a point? We can use it, but do not overuse it. For instance, you can say when they're asking about international trade, you can say international trade leads to, and then you can also come in and say it, but don't write a whole paragraph saying it. And then I'm seeing another question. Is it okay to use encourages to explain negative implication? For example, it encourages rural urban migration and its evils. I think that is not relevant. You could say it results into rural urban migration. I think that's a better way to state it. And then can I use leads when giving positive effects? Leads is fine, but then avoid using it. Use it only when you do not know how to state a point perfectly, but always use like words like it controls, it worsens. Use leads when you feel like you don't know how to bring out the other point. I'm not seeing any other questions. You could type a question in the chat. Kylie is asking, when can I use present continuous tense when stating measures? Let me give an example of a question. You can use present continuous when you're asked about, let me say, measures being taken, when they're asking you for measures that are being taken to improve something. And then developing countries should adopt labor-intensive techniques rather than capital-intensive production if they attain higher rates of development. Discuss. Here we are going to give the advantages of labor-intensive techniques and the disadvantages of capital-intensive techniques. I think Teacher Noah will react more to that question. And then after introducing the points, can I then say it worsens POP, for example? Ma'am, could you please rephrase your question? And you could also raise up your hands. You could raise your hands if you have a question.
So, Teacher Mildred, thank you. Can I start from here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Then we are handling number 6 because I know we have around 32 minutes. Some things I think will help them there, no problem. We shall focus on the tense. Thank you very much for focusing on the tense. Now, the tense, before I go on something else, dear candidates, is going to come out so much in paper 2, where I said there can come a scenario when there are almost 4 tenses there. So us going through with this one is to teach you how to handle. Present continuous tense is what Teacher Mildred was emphasizing. When they say measures being taken, straight away from the point statement, it should be present continuous, ing. But what makes our answers wrong? People reach explaining and they say this leads, and there you are off. So you must maintain and say this is leading, or this is helping, this is like that, which is the ing throughout. And the other one where there is have been, it is good to use past tense, and then you go away. If it is expanded the market full stop, this has helped to do this and this, which has, you continue like that. You don't deviate. Majority of the pamphlets that you rely on deviate and you trust them so much, and that's when you end up going off track. But for number 6, we have assessed the impact of labor intensive technique of production in developing countries, and look at the mark allocation. It's 14 marks. It's another sweet number to do, because when you see 14 marks, chances are that they may say 7 a piece, meaning 7 either side. So you have a chance to pass. At least you know that if I have 14 marks and I gamble part B, I am not as bad as somebody who has got 0. But we are talking about assessing. When you're assessing, it is two-sided. And in your notes, we have the advantages and disadvantages of labor intensive. Here in a seminar, we must focus on the trick. Rarely do they bring direct questions of this nature. They will always trigger you and they'll call them the other name. So in most cases, when they say labor saving, in brackets, they are meaning capital intensive. And when they say capital saving, they are meaning labor intensive. Those are the tricks that you should mind much about in a seminar. But for this case, the question was clear, to give the advantage of labor intensive and the disadvantage. But when you are giving them, you are going to show the positive and then the negative impacts. But as like I said earlier on, please do not waste time to separate them, because there you are creating a good platform for you to be judged well, especially by the ones who are going to mark you. Because when they are marking you, they are very fast, but leave alone being very fast, you actually become orderly. So start with the good side. For example, labor intensive is cheap and easily affordable. Why? This is due to the abundant labor supply of labor. So in most cases, when you want labor, someone comes up and says, we want to do this work of garden work. Can you get me somebody? It is easy to get such a worker, but even affordable, that you're going to, journey a war of bargaining with him. In a way, you'll manage, because he's a human being. He wants to earn. So it is becoming cheaper and affordable. Then number 2, it is a source of employment. So labor intensive is a source of employment to many people. And when you're explaining, you simply say this is because it requires many units of labor especially when you look at the work labor is required. So it requires quite many. It is very hard for you to see work where it is done by one person. Right now, I'm with the teacher Mildred. There are also other teachers here, teacher Stephen, and other people. I've seen teacher Mark. Very many. Why? This work is supposed to be done by very many. When I make a mistake, she will come up and say, hey, this is supposed to be like that. If we are doing like the education bit of it, we do counseling. There are matrons who work on your dormitories. There are cooks who prepare food for you. So eventually, because our methodology is labor intensive, in most cases, it ends up giving very many people jobs anyway. Then labor intensive reduces income inequality in an economy. When you're explaining, you simply say, this is because it employs many people, which leads to increased incomes of these people. So at least everyone gets a chance to work. If you are you look at the markets we have around our places, you'll discover that they have quite very many people, and everyone is selling whatever is selling and benefits. If you are looking at the shipping work, there are those who work with containers. If you are doing transport business, even these mere men who simply call up passengers, because passengers are people also, you have to lure them to come and board your taxi. So one whose work would be to call up people, convince them that they enter. Then there's a work by the other taxi guy, the driver. Then there's this guy who picks money from us. So eventually the taxi gives some employment to people, but there's also a mechanic who will work on it. There's also that ugly man called a policeman who will stop on it somewhere and complain about it and get some money of it. There's one who will wash it when it is dirty. So it ends up giving kind of somebody a chance to earn income from the same source called transport. Then facilitates the use of vast rural potentials. And this is because the methodology is mainly rural based. So it makes use of the resources that are usually in areas in the villages to do with the, most especially agriculture. Majority of the agricultural work requires some bit of labor intensive. So it ends up utilizing the resources since it is rural based. Then it promotes the use of locally available resources, this labor methodology. And it is because it is mostly because of labor that is required to do the work. So majority of this, because it requires labor to do the work, even it will make use of local available resources. When you are pruning, you'll use labor. When you are sorting, you'll use labor, etc. Then it widens the tax base. This is because more people are employed and government taxes their incomes. So it makes them to pay revenue to government because there are many that keep yearning to work and earn. Then labor intensive is much needed in agriculture sector, especially where human judgment is required or needed. For example, in agriculture, if you are harvesting coffee, we only advise to harvest red coffee. There is always that green one, but it is the human judgment that will come and say this one is not yet red, I cannot get it. If you are going to harvest sugar canes, you look for the ones that are ready. Some of you have come from regions where they grow matoke. You look at the matoke and find out whether it is ready before you get a panga to cut it. Something like that. So the same applies to tea picking. It requires human judgment that you will use judgment as a human being that this is ready. And then, unlike capital, which is the machines, once you bring a machine, it will just cut all the trees without even identifying whether this is young or not yet ready. Then it reduces the need to import expatriates. This methodology. This is because the technology is operated by the local available labor. So it does not need to use outside people to come and work in most cases, unlike the other capital intensive. So it reduces that need to really use a lot of imported expatriates. Then labor intensive leads to increased output. And why? When you're explaining, you'll say it is because it is easily spread all over the economy. So in other words, if you are going to use labor to plant maize as an example, everywhere when it rains, hopefully by September it will and October, people plant, you will see the partial things in your schools, but also maize anyway in the markets because of the fact that every area has had a chance. Then it reduces social costs in form of pollution. It's labor intensive. Why? It is because it reduces the use of machines that tend to release bad gases. So labor doesn't release that bit of pollution, unlike capital intensive. So it reduces that cost. Then it increases aggregate demand, and this is because people's incomes increase and therefore attain high purchasing power. So the fact that they earn the money, they even have the ability to purchase with the fact that they are earning something. Then after that, you now go to the other side and look at the disadvantages of this type of methodology. That is the disadvantages of labor intensive, but you show in an examination that it is negative impacts. Don't call them disadvantages, much as in your head you know that it is a disadvantage. Then you simply say results into low labor productivity. Why? This is because it is inefficient in most cases. As you know, labor works based on energy, mood. So if it is now 11:41, someone, if he's in the garden, says, this morning I've been in the garden, I'm tired. So you'll produce and stop where he has stopped. But if it is a machine, you'll use it throughout. It will only ask for something like oiling, or what we call servicing it. For it, you can use it continuously, but with the human being, it gives excuses. So sometimes it comes late. I was sick. I had a function. The productivity tends to be low, and that's a disadvantage. Then it is costly in the long run. At first, we said it is cheap, but in the long run, when you choose to use labor, in most cases, it is very costly in the long run. And why? It is because it becomes very expensive to maintain labor. Why? It asks for allowances as a bit of motivation, asks for good food, asks for parties. That is the labor. When you give him salary, he is not content and he says they feed us badly. When you feed him well, he says that does not even give us transport fund. When you give him transport fund, he says we don't even sleep in good houses. So it becomes costly when you stay with it, because for it, its needs keep what? Varying. Then it leads to production of low quality output. Why? It is because it is difficult to standardize output using labor intensive. If you have ever looked at the bricks made using local hands, they're quite different from the ones where the machines use them. So it means that the quality that comes from labor is a bit not good. Then it limits resource exploitation. Why? This is because it is slow and therefore few resources are used at a time. So with labor, like I said, it operates with a mood swing. When he feels he works, that's when he will work. And then he will work at his pace in most cases. So he'll end up exploiting resources at a level he wants. Then the methodology limits development of skills, and it does therefore not encourage application of modern skills, because majority of the labor work are direct. If you are going to be doing the work of sweeping streets, there's no skill you are attaining from that. If you are that woman who is, peeling the sweet potatoes, there's nothing like a skill that comes with that one. So in most cases, there's less development of the skills, unlike the machines. Then it limits technological development, and this is because of the limited innovations and inventions that comes with labor. You hardly see a labor being that innovative to develop new trends of adopting methodologies of production. Then we have encourages labor unrests or strikes. This is because of the constant demand for wages by labor. Ends up striking all the time because he wants better working conditions. Then it is slow and time consuming, and this is because of operation at a slow pace or a slow rate. So it takes a lot of time to do the work, and then it is hard to standardize output because human beings are largely not innovative to make sure that the goods produced are of good standard. So Teacher Mildred, part B, can you handle it very well as I come back in around 2 minutes and we handle that Keynesian thing and a few charts before time gets us?
Oh,
Teacher
okay, sir.
Mildred?
Okay, sir. So you're going to look at part B, discuss the factors that limit the level of technological development in developing countries, right? For limitations, we're looking at the negative parts. So we are going to give our answers like lack of efficient scientific skills. We could also give political instabilities, and then high level of conservatism. In this question, when they ask you for limitations, always use things like high. For instance, as I said, high level of conservatism, the political instabilities, the inappropriateness of technology, for example, being transferred to developing countries. Then you can also talk about the inadequate funds. I'm seeing a question that, what if I use well instead of separating? It depends where we're using the well. Mostly we use well when we are distinguishing definitions. We state a definition, then on a paragraph in the middle, we write the while, then you write another definition. But when we come to point statement, most times when you want to separate the points from the, for instance, when you're answering the neutral questions, when you're answering the two-sided part, we can separate the two-sided questions with however, but then we don't have to put it in the middle of the line alone. We just continue, we just say however, and then we bring about the negative part or the other part. And then I'm seeing a question. You had Mr. Noah using will when giving measures. So is that also allowed, or are we supposed to use can and may alone? As I said, whenever I ask for measures, always use the tense that you're being asked. Do not just assume that since it's paper 2 or paper 1, I should use this tense. Follow the tense that is in the question. That question gives us the tense to use. I hope that's clear. And then you're going to look at unemployment. I think you can wait for teacher Noah. And then I'm wondering about the use of it. For example, a question about import substitution. It's too long to write the whole thing for every point. So after writing an introductory statement, am I allowed to say it influences? Yeah, you can use it. I think it's fine. Unemployment, we're going to look at it. So I think we can wait for teacher Noah as we wait for unemployment.
Thank you, Teacher Midwid. I'm back. I wanted to handle that unemployment thing about Chinese and also some question I think about unemployment. And I don't know whether in your chat you have still other pending issues, because I want us to also dwell much on the other part of questions that have the so-called measures that have been. Is that okay, Teacher Mildred?
Yes, most people are asking about unemployment. So I told them to wait for you.
Okay. Okay, now for very fast, for number 7, which I am seeing here, they say explain the solutions to Keynesian unemployment, and they put 6 marks. When Keynes was actually giving a solution, first of all, Keynes gave one cause of unemployment, one cause, and that is what he called deficiency in aggregate demand. But later on, when he was giving a solution, he gave quite many solutions, around 6 of them. So when you are explaining the solutions as per Keynes, please separate them from the solutions of probably unemployment to Uganda or developing countries. So for him, he suggested to increase aggregate demand using the following measures. For example, he said reduce direct taxes on people's incomes, and when you reduce direct taxes on people's income, it will increase the aggregate demand, and then people will buy commodities, and then the production will go on. Then it is suggested to subsidize consumers so that production of goods, rather consumption of goods, becomes cheaper in that regard. Then he suggested use of expansionary monetary policy by government to ensure that there is more money in circulation. Then increase government expenditure in terms of the provision of public goods. When government spends more money, if government spends money on roads, for instance, that money does not only go to the engineers, but look at the ones who are going to sell land, the ones who are going to bring the vehicles, the ones who are going to cook food for those guys, the ones who are going to do the planning, the ones who are going to do the supervision, the ones who are going to sell cement, the ones who are going to sell metals. So any infra kind of expenditure ends up, like he suggested in his multiplier ideas, of creating income to people. Then he suggested to increase wages for labor so that the aggregate demand increases. And then he lastly suggested to encourage private investment through provision of incentives like tax holidays, and this one will focus on increasing again production of more goods, and then unemployment is dealt with. But for part B, when they ask to discuss the relevance of Keynesian theory of unemployment in developing countries, they are talking about where do we see his ideas kind of being relevant. There are not so many, they are around 6 to 7 areas. So here, you focus on the relevancies. For example, at times unemployment results due to fall in demand, both domestically and abroad. And usually here we say domestically when there is decline in the demand for products produced by the local farms, it leads to sometimes the closure of some of these businesses, then causing unemployment. When there is a decline in demand for products that locally here we produce, you just see certain farms closing. We have seen some of the supermarkets that we used to have here in Kampala, for instance. Nakumato Oasis, if you remember, went back to Kenya. Then there's another one which used to call ShopRite. The name is there in theory, but ShopRite went back to South Africa. For them, they said, we are not buying. Yet you would see people entering that supermarket. So as demand reduces, farms close down. So his theory is relevant. Then in developing countries, there is an element of industrialization, and the theory makes it really not to be ruled out, because he suggested something to do with industries, and in actual sense, where there are industries, the increasing demand of products creates more chance of people being employed, both labor and capital. So that makes it relevant. Then decline in export for the export products leads to decline in production and employment at home, especially in the agriculture sector, which makes the theory applicable. So the decline in demand for export products definitely reduces. At a time when Kenya refuses our eggs here, it means the exports have been declined. Then the poultry farmers end up not getting employed, as they would say, because outside our goods are not being bought. Then investment climate affects the employment levels, and so promotion of investment can expand employment. In other words, any form of investment climate determines how much of the investment that will expand employment, whereby when there is a provision of tax holiday to investors, it creates a chance of people being employed. And then he suggested measures like expansionary policy, which ensures stable export earnings, especially through export earnings, making the theory a bit relevant. And then the other thing is, in the long run, as the supply of co-parent factors for labor increase, there is a likelihood of the theory becoming relevant, which means that in most cases, because we know unemployment comes from the supply side, because of some of those factors that are not in play, when we take a time which is we call a long run, it becomes, capital becomes available, and then eventually people get employment. However, for part C limitations, please, under limitations, we are looking at criticisms of Keynesian theory of unemployment. Don't say limited capital. No. So you must know how the theory is suggested, and then thereafter you criticize it. So it is okay to criticize, or you okay to assume and then later, because we have these in our books, we don't want to go much into them, but you will simply say, for example, it mainly affects the developing industrial economies, yet majority of the developing economies are agro-based. And you get your map. Then the theory is concerned with the demand deficiency, yet unemployment is usually from the supply side. Then the theory assumes the conditions of full employment, yet these conditions are not these conditions are not in developing countries. Then it assumes the existence of a big and strong private sector, yet the private sector in our countries is still small and what? And weak, and go on like that. So Teacher Mildred, I want us to go to the chat because our time is almost coming to an end, and get me any of those things that they have inquired. But before, as you go there, let me continue to emphasize something to do with the tense. Dear members, if they ask a question concerning with measures that have been, please maintain that tense that Teacher Midway talked about. For instance, many times when they ask students present continuous, they get off. Then these have things, they think everything should be like that. But what you do, you make your notice very well and put the three tenses. There's present continuous and also the past tense. It will be easier for you to handle these tenses very well. For example, when you're talking about unemployment, if the question comes and says, state what measures have been taken to solve the problem of unemployment, even if they say in Uganda, what measures have been, because the measures are many, they expect you to present measure by measure. So in your not wasting time, straight away come and say the following are the measures that have been taken to control unemployment. Then for you, you want to waste time and say government has developed don't waste time. Just say developed infrastructures, full stop. Then you say government has improved basic infrastructure, comma, which has enabled producers to transport their goods to markets, full stop. This has created or encouraged more investment and production, which has created more people, like that. Everywhere has, because I'm talking of one. Then if you are talking about diversification, you say diversified the economy. Don't waste time. The government has, you simply come and say diversified the economy. The government has diversified the economy, comma, which has reduced dependence on one sector, full stop. This has encouraged the growth of other sectors like mining, which has increased the rate of job creation. If you are hearing me, I am driving all my points in the same direction, has, completely. Then if it is privatized, you say privatized public enterprises. Then you say public enterprises have been privatized, comma, which has enabled firms to expand their production scales, which has generated more jobs in the long run, like that. If it is population, control the population growth rates. Then you say, this has reduced the rate of population growth rates, which has matched the population size that relates to available resources, which has resulted into employment, like that. Now, the same points, if I'm going to explain present continuous, I still use the same tense. I say the following measures are being taken. Where I have said privatized, I say privatizing of public enterprises. Government is privatizing public enterprises, comma, which is enabling firms to expand production, thus creating. If it is diversify the economy, I will say diversifying the economy. The government is diversifying the economy, comma, which is helping reducing dependence on one sector like agriculture, full stop. This is encouraging, maintain the tense. You'll never fail, paper 2. Over to you, Teacher Mildred.
Excuse me, Teacher Noah. People in the comments were asking, they asked a question, how do you approach a question like, why is there a need to reduce unemployment in a country?
Okay. Now, why is there a need to reduce unemployment in a country? First of all, we must know that unemployment is bad, isn't it?
Yes.
So if I know the problems it brings, okay,
Yes.
then I work on the reasoning for the solution of those problems. For example, why is there a need to control and what? Come again?
Why is there a need to reduce unemployment?
So if I know unemployment leads to brain drain, dear candidates, I will say to control or to reduce brain drain. If I know unemployment leads to misery, to control misery and suffering among people. If I know unemployment results into discontent and then strikes and people are not happy, then to promote. So you make the points positive that come as a result of problems that come with unemployment. I don't know whether I'm clear.
Yes, you are. Thank you very much for that clarification there. And then for about 7 parts B, discuss the relevance of the Keynesian theory. They're saying, is discuss a two-sided question or not?
No, it is one-sided because discuss is coming at the start. Okay? It is coming at the start. If the question was saying examine the relevance and they put more than 6 marks,
Yes.
then you would look at two-sided. But it is one-sided, Teacher Mildred and the students.
I think that's all they're asking.
Okay.
And then someone, explaining the Keynesian theory,
what is it?
Is required while explaining the Keynesian theory.
Keynesian theory?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when Keynes was actually explaining his theory, I said, for him, he gave one cause, not causes. Everyone should get to know that. Keynes gave one cause. He said what causes unemployment is deficiency in aggregate demand for goods and what? And services. That is what Keynes gave. But later on, when he was explaining the solutions, he suggested ways of how that deficiency can be dealt with. So when you are explaining, for example, if they say explain the Keynesian theory of unemployment, first of all, they put 6 marks in brackets. So you're supposed to say Keynesian theory of unemployment states that unemployment arises due to deficiency in aggregate demand for goods and services, especially during a period of economic recession. Get your 2 marks. Then from 2 marks, you need to earn other marks. You go to the next paragraph and say, due to low
demand of final product.
Yes.
Farms reduce output. Pardon? You're breaking.
You're breaking. I don't know why.
Oh, due to low demand for final products, farms reduce output. Income and investment is discouraged. Thus, less capital are employed.
Yes, because Keynes said when there is low demand for goods, it is like when you have your goods in the shop, day one they don't buy your pancakes or chapati, but yet the same man or boy who was bringing the chapati was keeping coming and saying, tomorrow should I bring? You just tell him, don't bring, because even these ones of today, no one has bought them. So that is what Keynes said, due to low demand for final goods, First of all, farms reduce their output. Why do they reduce the output? Because they are discovering that no one is buying. And yet there is no producer who wants to produce goods and just dumps them in the store called bonded or warehouses. He always expects to buy. So when they discover that they are not producing, the first thing you do, you reduce the output levels. But as output levels reduce, remember, your income is from the output. The incomes fall. When the incomes fall, you can't therefore hire even labor and then machinery, which is capital. That's why you say that's less labor and capital are required or are employed. That's how unemployment comes about. It comes about because Kaini said almost every sector is crumbling because aggregate demand was total demand of all sectors in any economy. Consumers are not buying, the investors are not doing anything, government is also not doing, the other side of X minus M, the foreign kind of sector is also not kind of demanding. So everyone is crumbling. That's why he was calling it a massive kind of unemployment, that when it comes, it affects almost every country. And it is the reason why we criticize is that majority of his ideas were that outside the development. Then later on, those are 2 marks. You go on and say, I need to get a solution to unemployment. It is one solution, that is to increase aggregate demand, but using different methods. When you are giving methods, just list any 2, 3. The methods, you'll get your 2 marks. If you discover that the marks are beyond the 6, then you can draw, you can apply a diagram. But otherwise, you have finished it. So Kainis gave the cause, the efficiency, then he went ahead to show, and then later on he went to show the solution, which is increasing aggregate demand by subsidizing consumers, encouraging private investment, reducing taxes on people's income, expansion of monetary policy. Finished. There you have finished. The so-called assumptions are not called for. They are only used when you're going to use them to criticize for part B called limitations.
Thank you very much, Teacher Noah. Someone is still asking about 7 part B. 7 part B, it's a one-sided.
Teacher Mildred, you're breaking. Okay.
7 part B is a one-sided question. And then another question, why is it important for the developing countries to privatize public enterprises in order for them to attain economic growth and development?
Come again, you were off.
Why is it important for the developing countries to privatize public enterprises in order for them to attain economic growth and development?
Why is it important to privatize? It is important because of the advantages privatization brings. That question requires advantages of privatization in present tense, not reasoning. You cannot say to, but you say helps, or creates, results, encourages, like that.
I hope that's clear, everyone.
Because when Teacher Midwood, you were asking about reasons why unemployment should be what? Controlled.
Yes.
There's something I didn't emphasize. When you say, for example, to increase the level of acquired skills among a labor force, that is the point.
Yes.
Then you have to explain this is because controlling unemployment enables people to get opportunity to put in practice the skills they acquired. When you say to reduce income inequality, you say as more people become unemployed, they earn income, save it, and invest, like that. If you say to reduce dependency burden, as more people become employed, number of individuals who are depending on working group or class reduces. If you say to increase government revenue, you simply say government is able to impose taxes on whoever is working through pay as you earn, and more revenue is generated, like that. That's how they are supposed to handle. So you state, put a full stop with that, then continue to show.
Okay. And then someone is asking, do you have to put in Uganda for paper 2, either in the introducing statement or at the end of each point?
No, what you do, you just show it in the introductory statement. Okay? Putting it in the introductory statement means that you have already, what you are going to answer will already be paper 2 numbers. Rather, you are applying the content to Uganda, and it is enough. It may not feature anywhere else, but in any case, even if it features, it is also okay.
And then there is a question that is the Keynesian illustration still suspended?
No, you know, people bring a lot of theories. It's not suspended because if Teacher Mildred, you'll tell them that everyone, me and you, were surprised when they brought Rostos stages in section B, isn't it?
Yes.
Last year. And yet, almost over 20 years ago, we were teaching it in only section A. So UNEB is unpredictable. Therefore, any content NCDC prescribed is actually talked about. You must actually remind them that there has ever been a question of infrastructure in 2016. And we are like, if it has taken long without coming, why not someone read about infrastructure? Because infrastructure is also taught in economics, but much as many people neglect it. So there's no way the diagram was suspended. UNEP can't suspend anything. It is the NCD that can say this is out, but the fact that it's on the syllabus, let them revise.
And then, now, could you please give them guidelines on how they can excel in economics?
Come again?
Could you give them guidelines on how they can excel in economics?
How they can
excel in economics?
Very well. Now, dear candidates, economics is a very tricky subject in a way that both paper 1 and paper 2 actually ask the same content from the same book. They are not like other books, other subjects where you are going to do geography. Once you move out of the geography 1 content, you throw away the book and read another geography 2, or divinity, or physics 1. Economics, the same book you revise in the morning is the same book you're going to use in the afternoon. So what do you do? On a daily, economics must be on your menu. Why? The section A concepts are too many. As you think reserve price, you have murdered it very well, they bring something that you don't know. Define human capital and say, goodness me, where did I forget about this one? As you think you have revised the exchange rates, somebody surprises you with this. So because the concepts are very many and the topics are many, number 1, let you revise the economics on a daily. But in the morning, majority S5 topics, which are introduction, price theory, production, national income, strategies, will govern that paper. But when they are balancing, they also put the other areas between number 6 and 7. So no one should tell you that this topic comes in paper 1. No, for them they come either in the morning or afternoon. Then number 2, when you're answering paper 1, please ensure that you follow the particular tense. In most cases, it is present tense, where we say advantages, effects, suggest, they are going to be in that simple tense anyway. You are not going to see ing or have been in the morning. So when you're answering, you should come with like that. But we have what we call CATE, content, application, tense, and explanation. In most cases, when you're answering economics, we don't want you to use a lot of what we call the history explanation, not because I am against the subject, but too much explanation diverts your point from the main. And usually in the morning, when they are marking in the morning, they will say a point that is correct followed by a wrong explanation will earn you 0. So what do? If you discover that you cannot explain very well, and you want to avoid losing a mark, then try your best to show the point. And then when you're explaining, it should be a simple bit of explanation. I don't want to say the teacher told us that you just outline and go. No. In your explanation, you be brief. Don't become so wordy. There are topics which are wordy only when it calls for. If you have revised the monetary policy tools, if they are talking about banker rate, teacher Mildred, you'll even tell them that they are really thick if you are explaining how to handle inflation. But there are things like we have talked about advantages. You will show an advantage and show the effect it comes. Or you're going to show a reason of something and then you explain how that reason comes about. As simple as that. So look at the content in terms of presenting the point, then explain it briefly. Let the point be seen. Unlike other subjects, we are not interested in your English of furthermore, more to that, nevertheless, in addition, leave those words. For us, if you have had our presentation today, we were actually on point. They are looking at the point on the first line. Is it there? Yes. Has he tried to explain it? Yes. And because we want you to balance this paper, you have heard of your friends who sat before you. Someone gets D1 in the morning, and then he gets pass 8 in the afternoon. Paper 2 is different from paper 1. With paper 2, section B, even if they say how are prices determined in Uganda 6 marks, you will have to explain those 6 marks. You will not simply say, you will simply say bargaining and you throw in there. No. You will say bargaining, this is where, then you continue to explain. In other words, they want to see that explanation coming out very well. Then the other thing is in the afternoon, focus on the tenses. Take time and read these questions. These questions will come accumulating all those tenses. And today, candidates, they are no longer bringing direct questions. In your book, you have disadvantages of something, advantages of something. They are not going to bring it directly like that. Be ready to interpret the question. Like I liked the students who asked me about this question of why is there a need to reduce unemployment. That means they had now seen the tricky bit of it, that in the class they teach us about disadvantage, but now we should be ready too. However, there are common grounds on such, where, for instance, when they ask have, rather affect and affect, we are going to say two-sided. State the point in a neutral nature, balance it. And teacher Midwood, I heard you when I was moving out, someone was asking whether if is allowed. Please ignore if at any one time, unless the question is circumstantial. If they say, under what circumstances may blah, blah, blah be preferred, there you can start if it is good, when it is good, in case it is good. So avoid when, avoid if in all the economics presentation, unless it is circumstantial. It will not give you any what? Any mark. Then the other thing, paper 2, you will find that when they put 10 marks in brackets, they want 10 points. Therefore, make sure that the points are in line with the content, much as you will discover that there are numbers that will be two-sided, and there you will see that they want, if they are 14, they will say 7 times. But the 7 will imply that there is a mark for mentioning the point, and then there is a mark for explanation, which explanation is now key when you are balancing it very well. So the good thing about it is that in the afternoon, when you have mentioned your point, at least they will start with that one. But in the morning, when you see advantages and disadvantages, if you can elaborate with a 1.5 line statement, you are as better as somebody who has gone ahead to explain 4 lines and then her things or his things are not matching with the point. In the morning of paper 1, the moment the point is correct but the explanation is wrong, you get 0 on that part, on that line, on that answer. But when you mention and you can't explain, you have a chance of at least acquiring something. Because usually there's a mark and then there's another mark for explanation. But let's learn how to explain briefly. If you have had in our deliberations with me and teacher Mildred, we are not wordy. may you please avoid your what explanations unless you are doing monetary tools, economic growth points, national income points, and which other point? Planning. But the rest of the topics are very clear. Then for market structures, which I have seen, they are not that common nowadays. You never know in your years they may be common. Focus more on the common areas. Common areas include how to explain profit margins. When they say explain the profits, whether market structure, whichever, monopoly or oligopoly, just show profits are maximized at a point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and you put it in brackets because it is what we call a sufficient condition, though not necessary condition. That's a mark. Then thereafter, you will accompany with a diagram. When they are looking at the diagram, they will focus on the elasticities of those diagrams. For perfect competition, perfect elastic. Then the curves are U-shaped, but in a humbled way in the short run, not so expanded. Today I didn't have my, whiteboard for you to probably have these illustrations. Then the MC must cut at the lowest point of the AC curve, and where the MC cut meets the AC, you demarcate and shoot down that it is quantity. In the short run, almost all of firms will produce at excess capacity, so they're interested in that excess capacity thing. Then below it, what is marked is price. So you say price is determined at a point where average revenue is equal to determined at output level meeting, rather demand curve meeting the average revenue curve, something like that. Then you go on to show the profit and where average revenue is greater than average cost. Then you end with the shaded profit. Ignore the cost. The cost thing is no longer that much given attention in most cases. Unless there is a price, cost, and output, that's when you bring in output. But focus on the output, focus on the profit and then price when you're explaining. Because the thing is, in the morning, when your diagram is correct but followed by a wrong explanation, you earn some mark for the diagram. But if your diagram is wrong, even down they don't mark, because a wrong diagram cannot be explained by a correct explanation. And that is what I know majority students will not want when it comes to diagrams of market structures. But the rest are doable because we have the features themselves, which features we said are unique because these are market structure. You're not going to say they are many buyers and sellers. No, we already agreed about that one. We said you directly put them the way they are here. Then for structure questions, we have those questions of agriculture, of industry, of informal sector. The qualifying words, which people say qualifiers, will come in mainly, majorly, most, basically. It should not be forgotten. Then for sequential topics, we largely have two, where presentation is supposed to be in a sequence. There is the compilation of price indices, and then there is the credit creation. Those ones you'll have to drink, I don't know which drink, but it must be presented in that sequence and nature because they are following step by step. But questions that come in terms of limitation, a limitation must be a limitation straight away from the word mentioning point, and then show how it limits. Then for theory numbers, we have those major theories. Theories are doable because they in most cases they do not require a lot of explanation. So I encourage you also to revise around theories, but learn more on the explanation. Avoid these outlining things. That's why today, if you had me and teacher Mildred, we are focusing on explaining because we know you have these points, but the problem is about explanation. So we can't exhaust, almost all, but at least teacher Mildred between those areas. If they revise a daily, they learn the tense of the morning, which is just present tense, period. Afternoon, any tense can come. Then they'll be good to go. In the afternoon, endeavor to look at the mark allocation, but also in the morning, where is 10, 10, then you'll discover that those will be 10 points. Then some 16, you don't go below 10 points, but when they are well balanced, because a 16 question kind of question, you will discover that there's some mentioning, put a full stop, and then explain. But this is also good. Space your work. Economics allows spacing work when you have finished level of technology, high level of technology, leave one line and go on. We want you to not to be biased when you squeeze a lot of your work. Unlike other subjects, this one allows so that your work looks neat. And like I said, do that section A last. For as long as you have indicated that it is section A, they will see it. Whoever will mark, they will see it. But in most cases, people waste time in A. A, we have already seen that it teases a bit. We encourage you to also grab marks around it. But at least more focus should be put on section B. It is a paper where you move out and you would have the phone numbers in most cases. Thank you.
Teacher Noah, let me add a little on the guidelines.
Yes.
For instance, when you're going for an economics paper, always make sure you know at least 80% of the definitions in all the topics. For instance, when you're reading, as of now, as you're reading economics, I'm reading introduction to economics, get a tiny book. When you reach a definition part, write it in the definition book. Always go back, because if you notice, they bring a lot of definitions. And if you don't know definitions, it brings panic, it brings anxiety, so you won't be settled in the paper when you start panicking. So go paper with lots of definitions, and also calculations is also a must. Also go with laws and theories. The laws and theories are very few. You can read them and retain them. They're short topics that you don't need to go back and read at all times. They should be at the tip of your fingers. These short topics are introduction to economics, inflation, unemployment, structure of Uganda's economy, economic growth and development. The thing is tense in economics, tense matters. So work more on your tense. I think that's all to add on. Teacher Noah?
Yes, yes. I'm getting you, Teacher Mildred.
Yeah, that's all I was adding on.
Okay. So I see my battery is wearing out. Yes, I wanted to thank you very much, Teacher Mildred, and Teacher Stephen as well, for the work you actually have done today. I am sure the candidates have benefited a lot. I only pray that they follow and revise intensively. There will always be an improvement. People should stop, making the subject appear as if it is a lion. But it is those small things we have talked about that count much, so which they should not neglect. They are real key, and once they practice that one, all will be well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Teacher Noah. I think we can have a closing prayer by one of you. Yes, Teacher Dixon.
Okay, thank you very much. Let us pray. Father, we thank you for allowing us to meet. Thank you because all of the time you have made economics to a little bit appear simpler than how other people think. Father, may you bless the teacher who has taught us, and may you bless everyone who has been in this meeting. And may you make whatever we have heard to be implemented. And when November comes, as the students are writing their papers,
may they jubilate when they go outside. And when results are brought, may they jubilate when they find that they have passed economics. And when all things are done, we shall glorify your name. In the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we have prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. And then lessons will start on Monday. Mr. Kaziva will share the timetable with you. Thank you, Mr. Kaziva, for this time.